It seems like a seismic shift. No, let me take that back. It actually is a seismic shift, a cataclysmic COVID quake that has shaken the world's foundations, toppling our illusions of health and safety, of government, of medicine, our economic security, and even for some, the God we believe in. It's true that all of us personally have these seismic shifts from time to time. We will experience our own seismic shocks. It might be a divorce, it might be a diagnosis, it might be a depression, it might be the loss of a job, a friend. It might be anything that can tumble our world and scatter our worldview. I was talking to a friend recently, he's 80 years old, and he was trying to make the case that he thinks that this COVID virus might be as cataclysmic for our world as was World War I and the Spanish flu. I pray he's not right, but in fact, I intuitively think he is. It's all bizarre. And the fact that I am standing here today in this pulpit at Riverside Presbyterian Church on Monday morning recording my sermon to you for next Sunday at Independent Presbyterian Church in Birmingham is the case in point. I've never done this before. It's all new. By the way, my hope is to finally make it to Birmingham, hopefully after Memorial Day, and to preach the first sermon in the IPC pulpit and sanctuary for Pentecost, which is May the 31st. This COVID chaos gives me the privilege not only to preach from this pulpit, but also to preach an Easter sermon when it is not, in fact, Easter morning. Well, technically it is still Easter. We're in the liturgical season of Easter, but I've never preached an Easter sermon from an Easter text on a day that was not exactly Easter morning. So this is my first attempt at this. And I chose this text because I never did preach this Easter, and I needed to look at the text and try to understand what it was saying to me and to us as we move forward in this bizarre and scary world. The text comes from Matthew 28, verses 1 through 10. May God lift up to us an understanding, a new understanding of this word. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descending from heaven came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came to him, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will find me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I probably have preached this passage from Matthew 4 or 5 times on Easter morning, but I really never noticed the role the earthquake plays in it. There's plenty of other roles, the women, the angel, the soldiers, the empty tomb, but I never really paid much attention to the earthquake. I just assumed that the earthquake had rolled away the stone so the women could peer into the tomb and find it empty. But in fact, Matthew says the earthquake came to announce the angel's coming, and it was the angel who rolled away the stone and sat on top of it like some Thor moment in a movie. What Matthew wants us to see is that this quake, this Easter quake, announces the beginning of thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Matthew, probably more than any of the other gospel writers, understood the power of the Hebrew word, the Hebrew scriptures, and he wove those scriptures all through his text. In the Bible, earthquakes are usually a sign of something apocalyptic about to happen. If not that, certainly cataclysmic. It's a sign of God's anger and wrath, making the end of the old order, and out of that something brand new to be born. These earthquakes tumble the foundational stones of civilization like Hollywood paper mache props. Take this passage from Isaiah 24. Isaiah is forecasting the end of Jewish life as they knew it at the coming of the exile, the end of the temple. And he writes, "The earth is split through, the earth is shaken violently, the earth reels to and fro like a drunkard, and it totters like a shack. For its transgression is heavy upon it, and it will fall never to rise again." Or in this morning's call to worship, in the 46th Psalm, one of our favorites, "Though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its water roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult, we will not fear, because God is our refuge and our strength." Before there was any such thing as geologist or seismologist or science or even theology and philosophy, before there was Dr. Richter and his Richter scale, the Bible understood that all of these natural events were from God, signs from God, that they were natural but also in a way supernatural. And while the writers of the Bible thought that we are welcome to read these things literally, as I understand it, they really wanted us to understand them symbolically and spiritually. When an earthquake happens, everything tumbles. All that was is no longer. A new world is at order. He weaves these earthquake themes like a lovely poet through his gospel text. In fact, 3 times he mentions them. The first is from the conversation that he has with his disciples after they had just left the temple. They look back at this wonderful building, this amazing sacred building, and they brag about it, saying, "Look at these stones, how magnificent they are." And Jesus hears them, stops in his track, and turns back to them and said, "You see these stones to build this temple? I'll tell you the truth. Not one stone will be left here upon another, or it will all be thrown down." And we know from history that that was indeed the fact, the end of the power of the Second Temple and its reign in Jerusalem. And the next time Matthew brings up earthquakes is at Jesus' death and crucifixion. He says in Matthew 27, from noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which is, my God, why? Why have you forsaken me? Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. And Matthew says, at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and rocks were split. It's a cataclysmic and almost demonic seismic shift of such magnitude that the idolatries and illusions of all of those gathered there and all of us gathered here were meant to crumble. It topples the hope that we humans will finally evolve into a state of being that we will no longer be conflicted between our hearts and our minds and our souls and our spirits. It topples the illusion that we will finally find peace at last everywhere. It topples the illusion that science or knowledge or government will be able to fix us. It undermines the foundations upon which most of our religion is built, and that is that God will save us and protect us from every calamity. All of that came to an end on Good Friday when Jesus was crucified. At the foot of the cross, when we stand to understand it, when we let ourselves be revealed by its incredible power, at the foot of the cross, we discover the end of our righteousness, our self-righteousness, our pride, our hubris. And there, when we see it and the power of this quake, it should knock us to our knees on the ground in complete and utter humility and awe and reverence. It is at the cross that everything we have stood on has been ripped out from under us, and that is by the grace of God. As Christians, we believe that that moment was the greatest moment of injustice in history. And like so many of us who need a scapegoat, what is revealed to us is the darkness and sin and evil in us that requires that. I remember when I first preached the sermon immediately after 9/11, 2001. It was the Sunday after that. And I was moving along in the sermon talking about how horrible it was, what an act of evil it was, how awful the suffering, the loss, how it rent our hearts like it had rent the curtain in the temple. And out of nowhere, it came to me, it hit me in the middle of the sermon. Out of nowhere, as I'm preaching, I pound the pulpit and say, this is not the worst thing that has ever happened in the world. The worst thing was on Golgotha, when Jesus was crucified. Aside from the different ways the cross serves as an atonement, and there are many, from this moment on, we are meant to understand that there is no way forward. No growth, no new order, no new birth that does not have a cross in it. 12-steppers call it bottoming out. Buddhists call it self-negation. Christians call it repentance, which starts with our own hearts broken from the awareness of our own stuff as we stand at the foot of this cross. The truth is archetypal. In every single life and in every single history, it is true. It is the story of each of us from the beginning of time that we have to lose ourselves and everything we hold dear in order to find what matters. It's so true that not even God could come up with another way, for God lived the same truth out in the life and death of Jesus. When Jesus says, "This is the way and the truth and the life," I think what he means is that no one comes to the Father except by my way of the cross, my truth that suffering is always part of life and that life proclaims what finally matters. My life is about service and love. It was indeed a huge quake on Good Friday, but it was not the biggest. Matthew wants us to know it was just another earthquake, bigger than the others, but just another earthquake compared to the quake that was to come. When the women go to the tomb, a great quake happens. And Matthew's word for that is mega, an uber quake, bigger than any quake. It would be a 10 on the Richter scale quake. And when the Richter scale only goes up to 9, we get the point. It was a mega uber quake like nothing that had ever happened in the world. This is the great moment, Matthew says, when everything has changed at the tomb of the resurrection. If the cross changed everything on earth, the resurrection will change and has changed everything on earth and in heaven. It opens the tombs of our despair. It shows us the power of God to bring something brand new and good out of all that has been lost and suffering. It shows us that out of the worst thing that can happen in history, God can use that for the good of creation. Yes, this COVID virus has shaken our foundations, but let us take Matthew at his word. There is another seismic shift that is happening besides the virus. And it is God's Easter promise that nothing can separate us from God's love, not even COVID. That God transforms life and death into something brand new. That out of disorder comes new order. And it's happening now, even now. We see it in the suffering love of those healthcare workers who give up so much of themselves and the risk of their families. We see it in the hands of those offering food to the hungry all over the world. I've seen it last week in the generosity of you IPC members, which seems to indicate that you know we're doing good work and you want to do whatever you can to serve God's kingdom. It's all around us. If we have eyes to see in the love and the service, the compassion, our deep need for community, which we've come to be aware of during our isolation, in the amazing acts of kindness and meaning and gratitude, all around us it's happening. It's an Easter seismic shift. There will be more struggle and suffering, of course. There will be more economic issues and healthcare issues and more awareness of what we need to do differently. But we rest on the ground of our being, which is God, who is our refuge and our strength. And even though this ground has been shaken, the seismic shift that really matters is on Easter Sunday. The way things used to be will not be the same. Christ is risen. Hallelujah.